Hi, I'm certified medical professional Mateen Naumani. And though I've been banned in 18 states, I still have my degree. And I'm going to be teaching you about the integumentary system. And we begin with the epidermis. The epidermis. The epidermis is the outermost layer of the skin. It's the thing you can see specifically, like this area or this area. The epidermis relies on the dermis for blood and other nutrients, since it does not have any blood vessels of its own. Next, parts of the epidermis are the stratum corneum. The outermost layer of the epidermis, known as the stratum corneum, is made out of very specialized and keratinized cells. Fun fact, most of the dust in your household is actually dead skin cells. Scrumptious. The keratin in the stratum corneum is used as a protective thing, as it is less prone to scratching and tearing. This layer is also called the horny layer, as the keratin in it also makes up horns in animals such as deer and meese. The stratum corneum is 20 layers thick in some places, but it can be thinner in others, such as the eyelids, where it's the thinnest. The opposite is evident in the hands and the heels. Remember, children, the stratum corneum and other parts of the skin can be damaged by surfactants, like scented soap, as the chemicals they contain bond to the proteins in the skin and cause it to flake off. Remember, to stay clean, instead of using scented soaps, use unscented. Bland, just how I like it. The last few parts of the stratum corneum are the keratinocytes, corneocytes, and the desmosomes. The keratinocytes are made of keratin mostly, and as they go up through these cells, they become corneocytes, forming stronger cell envelopes. Between the corneocytes are desmosomes. These desmosomes serve as a brick and mortar fashion, connecting these pieces and making sure they are strongly bonded. Since the desmosomes are made of a different material and a different protein together, they cannot be shed as easily as other skin is and made into dust. The desmosomes have a different path they take in life, and that is to be broken down by enzymes within the body. However, the space between the desmosomes and the corneocytes aren't without flaw. They have spaces in between that are filled with lipids. These lipids, and the production center they are made in, cause the pH of the skin to be 4 to 5.5 pH. After the stratum corneum comes the stratum lucidium. The stratum lucidium is the thinner layer that has the different colored pigment as the rest of the skin, seen in the palms and the soles of the feet. Keratinocytes that make up the lucidium are dead and flat. Other than that, the pale tint coming from the lucidium comes from the elydium, a protein that is clear and packed with lipids, otherwise known as fat. Elidine comes from keratohyalin, which gives it its transparency. After the lucidium comes the granulosum. The stratum granulosum ranges from 1 to 2 cells thick. It contains a thicker mucocutaneous junction near the infundibilium of hair follicles. Cells here are flattened, and to pair have a flattened nuclei. The keratohyalin granules within these cells are actual granules, as they lack barrier function. Next up has the stratum spinosum. After the stratum granulosum comes the stratum spinosum. It's called the spinosum because of the spiny look that it has due to shrinking of microfilaments between desmosomes. Keratinization of cells begins at this layer. It is composed of polyhedral keratinocytes with large, pale staining nuclei. The reason for this pale staining is the active synthesis of cytokeratin. This is formed after the aggregation of forming tonofibrillus, which is a desmosome allowing strong connections to form between adjacent keratinocytes. The last step of the epidermis journey is the stratum basale. This is the deepest layer, closest to the dermis. It is a singular layer of columnar and cuboidal basal cells. The cells connected to each other by overlying stratum spinosum cells through the desmosomes and the hemidesmosomes, a large nucleus and ovoid nuclei, occupying most of the cell. The fact is, some of these basal cells can act as stem cells. These specific stem cells are called basal keratinocyte stem cells. Other cell types found within this area are the melanocytes, are the Langerhans and Merkel cells. Melanocytes produce pigment. Langerhans, immune. And Merkel form the touch receptors. These cells, however, have a downside. Basal cell cancers are accountable for about 80% of all skin cancers. And that is a fun fact. Next up, we have the dermis. Now the dermis is comprised of the papillary dermis and the reticular dermis. The dermis itself is primarily made up of fibroblasts and are responsible for the creation and secretion of procollagen and elastic fibers. Procollagen is catalyzed by enzymes to form collagen that can finally be cross-linked to create strong parallel layers. The collagen fibers make up around 70% of the dermis's weight. Most of this dermis weight from the collagens is type 1 collagen, and the rest is type 3, with type 2 here and there. The dermis also has mast cells and smooth muscle cells. Mast cells contain granules with histamine and other chemicals that are released upon cell disruption or damage. In the latter, the vascular smooth cells are responsible for contraction and dilation of blood vessels, maintaining homeostasis for body temperature within the body. Nerve endings at the end of the dermis detect touch, temperature, pressure, and react to pain stimuli. The sweat glands of the dermis are responsible for sweat production. Apical sweat glands are responsible for the odor given by the body at the armpits and genital region due to the oily sweat that is secreted and the bacteria that eats it. Now, for a more focused view of the dermis, starting with the papillary layer. This layer is made mostly of loose areolar connective tissue with collagen and elastic fibers forming a loose mesh. The topmost layer of the dermis that protrudes into the basal to form a finger-like dermal papillae is also part of the papillary layer. Now on to its brother, the reticular layer. The reticular layer strengthens the skin and provides its elasticity. The apican and sebaceous glands are found here, as it is more dense than the papillary dermis. Next comes the subcutaneous tissue. This is also known as the hypodermis. It is the innermost layer of the skin and is composed largely of adipose tissue. This layer of the hypodermis is made mostly of fat cells. The subcutaneous tissue is thickest in the gluteus maximus, palms of the hands, and again, the soles of the feet. The location of the subcutaneous tissue differ based upon gender. For males, it is more prominent and builds up more upon the abdomen and shoulders. For females, the subcutaneous tissue builds up more on the thighs, hips, and the gluteus maximus. The adipocytes, making up the adipose tissue, can swell or shrink based upon the actions that are being taken by the body. Fat within the hypodermis or subcutaneous tissue acts as a sort of protection for muscles, bones, organs, and other parts of the body on the inside. This layer also regulates body temperature, as it is an insulator. Injections to the hypodermis or the subcutaneous tissue act as a sort of time-release capsule. Since there aren't many blood vessels in this layer, it takes longer for the medicine or whatever that is injected to absorb into the bloodstream. After the hypodermis or the subcutaneous tissue comes Meissner's corpuscle. This is also known as the tactile corpuscle and is a mechanoreceptor or a sensory cell that responds to mechanical pressure or distortion. You can see this if you take your finger and press your palm. The pressure you feel is because of tactile corpuscles. These cells are distributed along various areas of the skin, however are concentrated in the fingers and lips. After the Meissner's corpuscle comes the Purkinje corpuscle. These respond only to mechanical deformations and are onion-shaped structures of non-neural tissue built over nerve endings, reducing mechanical sensitivity for the nerve terminal. Deeper within the body, we have blood vessels, composing of arteries and veins. Obviously, they circulate blood throughout the body, going through the circulatory system, while arteries take blood away from the heart, as well as gases and other nutrients that are carried by the blood. Veins bring back the blood to the heart to be reoxygenized and given nutrients, to then again spread in a near-endless cycle. Connecting the arteries and veins are capillaries, which are small, thin-walled blood vessels. The effectiveness of blood vessels can be affected by a number of different conditions. Some stem from the heart itself. Others can result in vessel block or blood pressure changes. The inner surface of every blood vessel is lined with a thin layer of endothelium, which separate from tough external layers of basal lamina, which is an extracellular matrix produced by the surrounding epithelial cells. An unfortunate but very cool event that can happen is angiogenesis. Angiogenesis is the effect of new blood vessels forming on their own. However, this can be detrimental, as tumors can grow these and form their own blood cells. Next up is the erector pili. The erector pili are small muscles at every hair follicle. The exception to this are small hair follicles that produce only vellus hairs. The muscle contractions of the erector pili cause hair to stand on end, which we call goosebumps. The last section of our journey begins in the hair, with the hair follicle. Hair follicles are part of the skin that grows hair, because it says hair. Hair is grown by the packaging of old cells, with the sebaceous gland covering the hair grown with sebum. You'll hear more about that later. After that is the hair papilla, the structure at the base of the hair follicle, made up of mostly connective tissue and capillaries. Following that, the hair shaft and root contains the shaft, which is the part that you can see, made of keratin, and the root, which is the part that is under the skin. The bulb is formed at the base of the hair follicle, where living cells divide and make your hair grow from this point. With sweat glands right near the reason that we can see our hair. Sweat glands are tubular structures that are a type of exocrine gland that release sweat through pores. Pores are the small opening of the skin that allow substances to enter or exit the skin. Going back to the sebaceous gland, another exocrine gland that opens around the hair follicle and secretes sebum. Sebum is an oily substance used to lubricate the hair and skin. The more sebaceous glands around hair, the darker and thicker the hair will be. This is a medical facts with Dr. Mateen Nam, who is very legally and very normal and totally is not banned in 17 states.